Hello guys and welcome to my new video. So today I decided to have a look at 7.35 Antorus DPS classes. I made a video about this before where I used the SimulationCraft, or at least SimulationCraft tier 21 results to determine the tiers and to have a default look into class DPS. I know tier 21 SimulationCraft results are not the best way to determine whether the class is going to be good or bad. I find that SimulationCraft results are a good tool to determine what kind of gear to use, what kind of sets, what kind of combination of tier 20 or tier 21, or what legendaries to use and things like that. So in gear wise, tier 21 SimulationCraft is pretty good. So today I'm going to be looking at the updated version because on November 21st there was a big tier 21 balance changes released. There was a lot of tiers that got nerfed really badly. There's few tiers that got buffed. So we're going to be looking at how that affected tier 21 SimulationCraft results, and we'll look at the best tiers for each class. We'll look at the tiers that will give you the most benefit, the 2 set, the 4 set, that's going to give you the most benefit to certain classes. And there's quite a few very interesting revelations that came about from the tier 21 balance checking. And I'm going to be including links and all of the documentation. If you want to check out more, please click the show more options, and all of the links are going to be there if you want to see for yourself and maybe see the calculations. So first of all, for tier 21 SimulationCraft, you can see here it's been updated. Disclaimer for the people who don't know about the SimulationCraft: it's basically each of your class tier your crafter will submit APLs or submit the gear, the rotation of your class for a single target fight. So we're talking about patchwork fight. For those who don't know what patchwork fight is basically completely single target, zero movement fight, which is basically non-existent in any of the tiers or any of the raids that have been released in the last couple of years. So straight away you can say the SimulationCraft results is not the best way to determine whether this class is going to be the best or not, but it's a decent way to determine what tiers to use and who has a good priority at DPS. Like for example, like for some fights you will need some single target priority DPS, and some classes might be used, some classes are going to be better than others in providing that single target DPS. So this is what SimulationCraft can be used for. Keep in mind, like with the previous video that I made, things change and things are always going to get updated. So keep in mind, right now there is probably not going to be any class changes made before Antorus, but I'm very certain that there's going to be some kind of tier tuning or class tuning that's going to happen before Mythic Antorus, that's going to be released 1 week after the normal Antorus is released. So by looking at the DPS charts here, we'll see Fury Wars. Enhancement Shaman's doing really well on single target, purely for the fact that their tier 21 got massively buffed in the November 21st changes. Enhancement Shaman tier 21 is basically a single target tier, so it's no surprise that they're doing really well on single targets. Kind of similar to Shadow Priest tier 21. Shadow Priest is doing really well. Shadow Priest tier 21 before all the nerfs used to be quite good for AoE, or used to be an AoE tier. After all the nerfs that happened, Shadow Priest tier 21 is basically for single target, and they're doing quite well. You can see that Windwalker monks are actually doing pretty well. Interesting part about Windwalker monk tier 21 is that the majority of the damage is coming from having the 4 set, and the 2 set itself is, depending on your builds and things like that, does not provide a crazy amount of DPS. So as a Windwalker monk, you'll want to pick up the 4 set as fast as possible. And then you see that Havoc demon hunters being dropped down. They used to sim much higher, basically because their tier 21 got destroyed. Their tier 21 got nerfed really badly, and right now the Havoc demon hunters are not simming as well. Balanced Druids are here. Keep in mind that Balanced Druids are using tier 20 4 set for this, so it's going to be depending on the kind of Titan Forge tier 21 you can pick up, but I'm gonna cover that a bit later on. So you kind of see the rogues at the bottom-ish, which does not mean that they're the worst or the best class. It does not mean that, like I said, these are just purely single target sims, and it's based on gear. It's very interesting to see that Outlaw Rogues and Assassination Rogues are using tier 21 4 set with the legendary shoulders, while the Subtlety Rogues, who were known to be really reliant on legendary shoulders, in this sim, a Subtlety Rogue is actually using tier 21 4 set and tier 22 set. And by using the 6 tier set, a Sully Rogue is not using the shoulders. I don't know whether how correct this is going to be, but this might mean that Rogue or Sully Rogue dependence on the legendary shoulders, especially for single target, is going to be reduced. But that is yet to be seen. So, like I mentioned before, there's a lot of different changes that are happening here. Unholy and Frost are stimming really, really closely together. Frost used to be, Frost tier 21 was insanely powerful before, and it got nerfed really, really badly in the last week or so. And it brought Frost and Unholy very close together. So, before that, people considered that Frost might become the go-to spec in Antorus. By the nerfs that happened to Frost tier 21, there's a lot more... People are unsure which spec is going to be the best, which spec provides more utility, or which spec is easier to play on certain fights, which spec loses the least amount of DPS when there's movement involved, because remember, this is a patchwork fight, there's no movement here. So it's a lot harder to decide between which is better, Unholy or Frost, or which is going to be better. Both of the tier 21s for Unholy and Frost are looking to be around the same, and are looking to be really, really strong tier 21s. If you look at the Warlocks, the Warlocks are doing pretty well. You also have to consider the Hunters. In this SimCraft, you see the Beastmastery Hunters here are using tier 21 4 set. It is kind of recommended, at least for the very start of Antorus, is that Hunters will be wearing... Well, for the Beastmastery Hunters, tier 19, tier 20 and tier 21 are perfectly viable. You'll probably be using tier 19 if you have a high Titan Force tier 19. You have to sim yourself, but most likely for Beastmaster Hunters who are incoming on tours, they'll be using tier 24 set with tier 21 2 set. And you'll be using that until you reach tier 21 4 set, like highly Titan Force. Because remember, these sims are using tier 21, which is 960 plus. So before that, you most likely be entering with tier 24 set and tier 9 and tier 21 2 set. The same kind of deal actually is applied to Marksmanship Hunters, because tier 21 4 set is not that great, at least for single target. Marksmanship Hunters are opting to use, with Boomkins in this scenario, they're opting to use tier 24 set with tier 21 2 set. So these are the only two classes out of all of the specs that I've seen that end up using tier 24 set. So if you're a Marksmanship Hunter or a balanced Druid, or like I mentioned before, Beastmastery Hunter, you need to consider going into the tier 24 set. You need to consider trying to get as high tier 20 as possible, at least for single target for the time being, at least for the entry level Antorus raids. You need to try and farm those tiers as soon as possible. Funny enough, most of the Hunter tier 21s are pretty average to bad, which is quite sad to see nearly every Hunter tiers being this low or this average. Besides the Marksmanship Hunters, Boomkins and BM Hunters to a certain extent, the only other classes that did not use tier 21 4 set by default, or just use tier 21 4 set, are Arcane Mages, Frost Mages and Sully Rogues, like I mentioned. Arcane Mages, Frost Mages and Sully Rogues use tier 21 4 set with tier 22 set. And like I mentioned before, Sully Rogues used the tier 22 set, and therefore we're not using legendary shoulders for single target. Like I said, not sure correct, but it's very interesting to see that for Rogues, Outlaw is simming better. As you can see here, Outlaw has a big margin of RNG. An Outlaw Rogue can technically be like one of the best DPS, depending on the RNG. So it's really hard to say which spec is going to be the best for Antorus. A lot of people were considering going into Assassination or maybe even Outlaw route. So depending on the tier 21s, majority of the specs for Rogues are looking very decent, and it's going to be very hard to determine which one is going to be the go-to best spec to go as Rogue. So it's very interesting to see. Maybe if you hate your Subtlety, maybe if you don't like being so reliant on legendary shoulders, maybe that's going to change in Antorus. So that's interesting and something to keep in mind. Now, by just looking at DPS charts, let's look at tier 21. Actually, before we're going to look at tier 21, Mages are looking really strong as well. You see Frost is simming really well. Frost by default is considered the single target DPS. Arcane and Fire are both AoE specs. It's really hard to say which is going to be the go-to spec. Fire, a lot of people will tell you that Fire is going to do really well. I'm still not sure about this, but we'll look at the tier 21s. But for the people who did play Arcane in Tomb of Sargeras, they know that Arcane Mages were not doing well on single target. They were basically an AoE spec in Tomb of Sargeras. It's interesting to see that Arcane Mages are simming better for single target than Antorus. So maybe there's going to be more Arcane Mages in Antorus, but that's yet to be seen. So let's look at tier 21 and the biggest winners and losers of tier 21. So I kind of grouped the different classes into different sets of viability of tier 21. So let's look at the amazing sets. So Assassination Rogue tier 21 is simming at around 13%, which is just insane and is your #1 tier set. Assassination Rogue will be looking to pick up 4 set as soon as possible. Frost Decays and Unholy Decays are actually doing really well. Both of the tier sets are simming anywhere from 9 to 11% in terms of DPS increase, which is really good. So if you're a Frost Decay or a Frost or Unholy Decay, still not sure which is the best spec to go in Antorus. Retribution Paladin, their tier 21 set was nerfed recently, even though Retribution Paladin tier 21 is simming anywhere between 10 and 11%. Then you have Enhancement Shamans, whose tier 21 was buffed by a lot and is simming between 9 to 10%, which is really good. And the same with Shadow Priest, whose tier 21 set is equivalent to 9 to 10% damage increase, even though Shadow Priest received a nerf very recently. Shadow Priest tier 21, you have to remember, is purely single target based, so this is not going to be the same value for AoE fights. Now let's look at the almost amazing tiers. So these are anywhere between 8 to 9% increase in terms of DPS. You have the Frost Mages, you have Outlaw Rogues, you have Demonology Warlocks, you have Windwalker Monks. Like I mentioned before, Windwalker Monks, the majority of the increase is coming from the 4 set. And you have the Elemental Shamans and you have Fury Warriors. Now let's look at the good to decent, which is 7 to 8% DPS increase. We have Arcane Mages, we have the Fire Mages, Affliction Warlocks, Destruction Warlocks, and Arms Warriors. You have to keep in mind that Arms and Fury Warrior tier 21 set was heavily nerfed in the last couple of days as well. So we'll look at the average to bad tier sets, which is 5 to 6%, which is, depending on your tier 20, you might be looking at, or you'd be considering at actually using tier 20, depending on how good your tier 20 is for your class. But at 5 to 6% increase is not amazing, it's not great, and you actually be looking at trying to replace these pieces depending on your tier 20. So you have the Balanced Druid tier 21. Like I mentioned before, Balanced Druids will be using tier 24 set and tier 21 2 set. Now it's actually really interesting to say, if you want to know the exact values, tier 21 2 set is equivalent to around 3% for single target and AoE. Tier 21 4 set is equivalent to around 3% on a single target fight, which is really poor, and it's equivalent to 8% on AoE. So tier 21 4 set is great for AoE. And you can see that tier 20 4 set is equivalent to around 8% increase in AoE and single target. So that is why Balanced Druids will be looking to use tier 24 set on single target fights, and tier 21 4 set on AoE fights. But as you can see, Balanced Druid tier 21 on single target is really not that great. Then you have Havoc Demon Hunters, which received a huge nerf to their tier 21, and it's around 5 to 6%, maybe a bit more. Then you have Marksmanship Hunters. Marksmanship Hunters are opting to use tier 24 set for single target, and then you have Survival Hunters somewhere around there. And now we go to the terrible tiers, and this is actually very interesting to see. Feral Druid simmed as the worst tier in the game with an overall percentage increase of 3% for tier 21, which is just insanely low. Now, I've talked to some of the people in the discourse and things like that. It is highly recommended as a Feral Druid to sim yourself. To sim yourself with pieces of tier 20, to sim yourself with pieces of tier 21. In the sim, for the single target, Feral Druid is using a tier 21 4 set, but it's highly possible, depending on your item levels, that maybe your tier 20 with combination of tier 21 is going to sim better. because 3% from tier 21 is insanely bad. And it makes me really sad, it makes me really sad to see ferals. So I highly advise you to sim yourself with different versions of tier 20 and tier 21 and see the best possible combination. Then you have Outlaw rogues whose tier got nerfed again heavily in the last couple of days, and Outlaw is simming at around 4% overall increase, which is really not that great. Then you have Beastmaster Hunters, like I said, 4%. Beastmaster Hunters will be looking to use tier 24 set with tier 21 2 set, at least for the start of Antorus. And now let's just look at the, I thought it'll be interesting to include the top 5 classes that benefit the most from tier 21 2 set. So these are the classes they're going to be looking to pick up tier 21 as 2 set as soon as possible. Now keep in mind that sometimes tier 21 2 set and 4 set has direct synergy with each other, so these might not always be correct, but this is the top 5 classes. So Assassination Rogues with a 6% increase from just their tier 21 2 set. Frost Decays and Unholy decays are somewhere between 4 to 6%, which is really good. Then you have Affliction and Retribution Paladins benefiting the most from tier 21 2 set. Let's look at classes that benefit the most from completing the 4 set. The classes that are going to be looking to get their 4 sets straight away as well. Windwalker monks are at the top at 8%. Basically, most of their energy or most of their power from tier 21 comes from completing the 4 set. So as a Windwalker monk, you'll be looking to get the 4 set as soon as possible. Assassination Rogue there is again with a 6%. Outlaw Rogue is there with 5% or around there. Red Paladin and Enhancement Shaman are there very closely followed with 5% or 5.5%. Which is not a big surprise after the big buffs to tier 21. Now you have to keep in mind the way these numbers are calculated. It's done by 2 people actually. It's done by Warrior Sari and Well, who basically used the tier 21 SimulationCraft, and they made their own SimulationCraft without using the tiers. And what they did is they compared the numbers from the simulation with tiers and without the tiers and calculated the benefit for each of the class. Now, these tier 21 benefit calculations are only effective for single target DPS. It is updated to keep up with the tier 21 November tier changes, so it is quite up to date, but keep in mind if there's going to be any changes coming in the next couple of weeks or next couple of days, these are going to change a lot. Like I said, for example, Assassination Rogue tier 21 is looking at 13% DPS increase. Frost Decays were simming at 13% a couple of weeks ago, and Frost Decay tier 21 was nerfed heavily. So there is a high chance that these super powerful tiers might be reduced in value in the next couple of days, so you have to keep that in mind. And I have to thank for all the people who did the math for this. All of the links are in the descriptions below. If you want to know about this, just check out the descriptions, check out the links. There's more information there. I'll try and keep this video up to date as possible, and I'll update my channel with latest videos about tier 21's, latest videos with class changes. So thank you for watching this little guide. Let me know how you feel about this tier 21 ranking. Let me know how you feel about your classes. Let me know which tiers are you going to be using. I am quite upset about seeing Feral simming so low, but maybe there is certain issues with the calculations. I'm hoping there is certain issues with calculations, because Feral Druid tier 21 at least is really not simming that well. But let me know how you feel about the changes. Thank you for watching this guide, and I'll see you next time.